Now, someone asked why cover the Vox tree last instead of first when it comes to the voxel room, and that is a really good question because in most cases you do want to cover that first in terms of knowing how to move in and out of that. But I covered a lot of that in the introductory video, so I didn't want to rehack that until last because there's some advanced things or semi-advanced things that you can do. I don't want to say advanced, but more advanced things that you could do with the Vox tree that can be very useful as you're dealing with the voxel room, and but they're not critical necessarily, to getting the things done that we've been talking about so far necessarily. Now, having said that, what you'll see is the Vox tree is here on my right in my configuration or layout. And we have a lot of different layers. Of course, these are layers. Your root never goes away. This is just your root scenario, and there's really not much else you can do with it. You just need to leave that layer be. You can't really move it. You can't adjust it. But you can say, let's say you put it on surface mode, you can try to ghost it, etc. It's not affecting any of the things underneath it. Now, these layers, however, are underneath it. So any layers that sit just one indentation out are children of the root. So the root is the master. These are layers, and then anything indented inside those are children that whose parents are the layer above them. And so in other words, that you may have several children in a layer, but like for instance, these two children of this layer, but these are indented under their parent. And we know this because I can click the plus sign and expand or collapse the children and parent relationship there. Now, I had also mentioned that it's very important to name your layers in some descriptive manner that helps you if possible. So in this case, one way to know what's on these layers is to click the eye icon to hide or show them. Well, it turns out we have two different objects. Now, looking at them in the four different layers, I would have assumed they're all on different layers. And if I didn't know that, or I haven't been to this product in a while, and now I'm seeing that, I may not notice that they actually are part of the same grouping or relationship, but they are still, yes, they are on different layers. They should be anyway. And if they're not, then it could be that they're sitting in some form or fashion in this relationship, because we know that if I hide this, they're both going away. But if I hide the child layer, they're also both going away. So that tells me that both of these shapes lie on this one layer here. And I know that because when I click on a layer, it should highlight what is on those layers. So in this case, I've got both these shapes being highlighted. If I click on this one, I have both of these shapes highlighted. So in the assumption that these four layers here contain a separate object each, it would be incorrect. So this layer is not showing or hiding anything. This layer actually does not contain anything. And so I'm going to delete it because I don't need it. If I do want it, I can certainly do that. But I could, in this case, say shapes grouping 1 or whatever name I want to give it. And then this could be shapes grouping 2. And yes, you can have spaces in the name, so you don't have to actually have them typed out without spaces. It doesn't really matter. But so in this case, I have a child with shapes grouping 1. It may be that they sit, like I said, in the child and not the top layer. And I'll know this because if I now hide or show shapes grouping 1, I've just made these children of the root. I've taken them out of that relationship. So I know that both those objects sit on these layers. So how do I get one of these objects onto its own layer? And that's where the split tool comes. I should be able to, say, go with my ePanel, grab this, and draw a box around one of these shapes. And if I do that, you'll see that a new layer is created, and it has the box on it. In this case, I'm going to change the parent to root. I'm going to say cube. And in this case, I'm sorry, that was not the cube, and I know that because that just highlighted. So that's my capsule. This is my cube, and I can put this with a parent of shapes grouping 1, and this with a parent of shapes grouping 1, oops, if I want, or whatever the name of that layer would be, right? And so I've gotten back to that relationship that I intended to have, as having both of those as children on their own layer under the parent. Another thing you want to pay attention to are the icons down here. So you can add a new layer, you can delete an existing layer, you can duplicate a layer, you can edit the settings of the shader that's assigned to that particular object, or you can just change them. You can create a space with identical density transformation. It's important. It's saying that it is important if you want to use copy tool without losing quality, create a new space and use the copy tool. So this is useful in that case. I hardly ever use it, but it's there. You can make a symmetrical copy. So what happens on had happened on one side can be copied to basically can use one layer as a source and have it copy over to the other copied layers. So that's an extremely useful feature if you need it. Increase resolution, decrease resolution, and then of course you've got this clear current object in the layer, or whatever. So the other thing to point out is that you can ghost these objects. If I click on these little dots here, I'm ghosting these objects, which means I can't do anything to them, but I can see through them and I know they're there. Again, you can go from surface mode to voxel mode by clicking on the V or the S, and then of course hide and unhide your groupings. The other thing I will point out is this little icon as you appear when you float over these layers. That puts basically a cache. It says downgrade the volume. It's not downgrading the resolution. It's downgrading its space in your RAM, in your memory on your computer. So if you have large, let's say large objects in a layer, you can click on that and it will basically save a copy to the hard drive and only access it when you need it. And then, so if you click on that, it should turn into this arrow, which means it's been cached and it can be edited. But if you need to bring it back into memory to work on something in better detail, whatever, you can bring it up and pull it off the drive. I kind of wish this was automatic, but I guess it's very time consuming when you have huge shapes that you do need to put on there. It actually can produce a little bit of a delay when you're caching them there. The other thing I want to point out is if you right click on a layer, you actually have a whole bunch of different options that you can go through. I won't go through all these because these are introductory. This is an introductory video. Essentially, the whole point is to introduce you and get you familiar with 3D Coat as a whole. But the ones you're probably going to be most concerned about are import and export, which I showed you before. Auto topo, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Combine with children, merge, subtract from. These are layer interactions here. There's a bunch of other features, but essentially that's it. And hopefully you've learned a lot. We'll move on to the next big section of the course, which essentially is going to be going from the voxel room to the Retopo room, and then getting your Retopo work started.